Hello and welcome to Music City Murder, a podcast meant to give people an insight into the history behind Nashville's most infamous murders. The show is hosted by author T. Blake Brady. You can find his novels at Parnassus Books in Green Hills, as well as on Amazon. Fans of James Lee Burke's Dave Robichaux series will probably dig these books too. One last thing before we begin. If you like what you hear, be sure to rate and review Music City Murder on the Apple Podcasts app. It's the little purple icon on your phone. Reviews help to distinguish the show from millions of other podcasts out there. A 5-star review is appreciated, but it doesn't matter what you say. No one is sure how it helps, but it definitely does. It has something to do with the algorithm, I think. Anyway, let's get on to the show.
Hello and welcome, folks. As the intro says, you are listening to Music City Murder, a true crime podcast. I'm your host, Tyler, and this week we're going to be continuing the insanity of last week's case. That's right, we're going to be talking about the Night Stalker, Richard Ramirez. And this is a Patreon episode. This isn't actually a series of crimes that took place in Nashville. Part of the joy of doing this podcast is I'm able to post stuff onto Patreon and do cases that I want to do. And Richard Ramirez is a really fascinating figure in American crime history. Now, I went ahead and put up the entire last episode, episode 18, which is 36 minutes of absolute crazy, monstrous, deviant behavior. But this week I am going to turn this into a preview, so if you want to hear the full enchilada, you're going to have to go to patreon.com/Music City Murder in order to get the entire thing. This is going to end up being more than a two-parter. I thought that I'd be able to finish it up in two, but I reached a point where I just could not deal with any more of Richard Ramirez's crime. So we're just going to have to split it up even more because there's just too much to get into, and it's too heartbreaking and harrowing. And just a warning up top, this episode is going to be gruesome. So if you are squeamish in any way, then skip this one. Just being upfront, there were things that I didn't want to write that I did write, and there were some things that I kind of minimized because it's tough. I don't know if it's that Richard Ramirez's crimes go further than other serial killers, or that the detail that is written about in Philip Carlo's book, The Night Stalker, is just more detailed, but it just leaves me feeling very dirty and gross. So if that's not what you're into, maybe skip this one. So like I said earlier, the book that I'm using is The Night Stalker by Philip Carlo, almost exclusively. And it's just, we're going to get back into it. Like I said before, this is the second part of the series, and last we left Richard Ramirez, he was a teenager who had basically seen a woman murdered right in front of him by his cousin, whom he looked up to, and he got into a life of murder on his own. He had committed a few murders, but you can go back to part 1 and listen to all of that. So if you are a Patreon subscriber, we're going to keep going, and I'll probably leave a little bit up, just a preview for everybody else, but again, got to head over to Patreon to get the full thing. So let's get right into this. This episode will deal with the bulk of Ramirez's crimes, and there will probably be another episode of his murders because there, A, are so many, and B, they're just very gruesome. It's overwhelmingly bleak. So that's kind of where we are. We're going to pick up with the next set of murders from Ramirez. On March 27th, 1985, this is where we're going to pick up. Around 2 a.m., the night was overcast and there were no cars on the street. None save for Richard Ramirez's stolen Toyota. Ramirez went to a home that he had burglarized just a year earlier outside of Whittier, California. It was a one-story brick structure on a half-acre of land with a white fence and a few citrus trees out front. Ramirez crept around to the backyard and, looking into a window, saw Maxine Zazzara sleeping. It excited him, so he tried to pry the screens off the windows to get inside and wasn't immediately successful. He skulked around the property until he found a way inside and found Vincent Zazzara sleeping on the den couch, not in the bedroom. He pulled his .22 caliber pistol from his waistband and shot the 64-year-old man just above his left ear. Zazzara tried to stand and grab the intruder's gun, but the bullet had severed his carotid artery, so, bleeding out and gushing blood everywhere, he lost all motor function. Meanwhile, his wife, Maxine, was awakened by the sound of the gunshot. She managed to get out of the bed just as Ramirez entered, holding the .22. She demanded that he leave, and, enraged, Ramirez beat her before tying her up with one of her husband's neckties. While Ramirez ransacked the bedroom, looking for valuables, Maxine tried to untie her hands. She could hear Vincent breathing his last breaths up the hall, and so she was hoping to get to the shotgun that lay under their bed. After they had been robbed the previous year by Ramirez, Vincent Zazzara had purchased a shotgun. Maxine herself carried a .45 pistol in her purse, but since it wasn't within reach, the shotgun was her only hope. Miraculously, she managed to free herself, grabbing the shotgun and standing up, pointing the weapon at Ramirez's back. The killer, sensing the figure behind him, turned and saw Zazzara pointing the shotgun at him. The color drained from Ramirez's face as Maxine Zazzara pulled the trigger. There was only the sound of a dry click. The gun was empty. Vincent had taken the shells out that weekend because their grandchildren were visiting. If not for that coincidence, the name Richard Ramirez would likely be lost to history. Instead, the furious killer raised his .22 pistol and shot Maxine Zazzara 3 times, knocking her to the ground. That wasn't enough for him, though, and here's what I have to tell you. It gets grisly, so be forewarned. Ramirez went into the kitchen and found a 10-inch carving knife and went back to the bleeding woman. At first, he tried to cut out her heart, but he couldn't get through the breastbone, so he decided instead on her eyes. He cut away her eyelids and removed the eyes, placing them in a nearby jewelry box, laughing the whole time. He then kept stabbing her and attempted unsuccessfully to have sex with her as she lay dying. On his way out, he gathered what valuables he could, throwing them into a pillowcase. He kept the shotgun, but left Maxine's .45 on the bed next to her body. And then he fled, carrying the jewelry box which held Maxine Zazzara's extracted eyeballs. He went back to his living space at the time, washed the blood off of himself, and then took the stolen items to a man who would take them, no questions asked. Now here is where I feel compelled to mention the existence of a place called the Cecil Hotel. The Cecil is an infamous location in the history of downtown Los Angeles. Located basically right downtown, the hotel began as a luxury location for those who wanted to experience all that LA had to offer back in the 30s, 40s, and 50s. Eventually, though, it fell into disrepair as the surrounding block slowly turned into the city's Skid Row. Because of a concerted effort to cordon off the city's homeless population from the rest of LA, homeless people roamed the streets openly. Prostitutes took their johns to the hotel, and it became a form of low-rent housing for dozens of city dwellers. If you've ever heard of the case of Elisa Lam, then chances are you've encountered stories about the Cecil Hotel. Lamb was a Canadian student and tourist who disappeared while visiting the city. Her last known location? That's right, the Cecil Hotel. I won't spoil the ending of her story, but let's just say it gets a little hard to swallow. But anyway, back to the story at hand. The Zazaras would be discovered by an employee of theirs the next morning. Homicide detectives Russ Ulock